Are you struggling to complete step 4 of the 12 steps? This workshop will guide you through a straightforward approach to the 4th step, as outlined in the AA Big Book. Herb will provide a clear and concise method to help you effectively work through this crucial step, demystifying any confusion surrounding the process. In addition to exploring the intricacies of step 4, the workshop will delve into the role of sponsorship and how to guide others through this step. Participants will gain valuable insights into the importance of step 4 in achieving emotional sobriety and lasting recovery. This interactive session will include a comprehensive review, practical recommendations, and ample time for questions and answers. Join us and take a significant stride towards finding the emotional freedom you deserve. So I turn it over to Herb, and I'm thrilled that you're here today, Herb. I can't wait to hear what you have to teach me.
Well, thank you so much, Susie and Patrick, for inviting me back, and a very ambitious description of today. Patrick has a wonderful way with words, writing them, and Susie in speaking them. And I'm going to attempt to live up to them. So it's a little bit of a difference here. I want you each to really hear what I'm about to say, and that is, of course I can teach you. Of course I can review the Big Book. Of course I can share my experience. Of course I can go deep into an analytic version of the step 4 process. You've all been, or most of you have had some exposure to me, and you know all of that's true. But that's not what Patrick and Susie promised here today, and it's not what I'm going to attempt to do. Demystify may be too strong, but I want to simplify step 4. It's a crucial step. It's the first step, I believe, where I had a spiritual awakening. By the definition in Appendix 2, if you're not familiar with the Big Book, page 567, 568, take a look at that at some point. Don't do it now. Please just pay attention to my words, make some notes if you care to, and please raise your hand if in fact you have some comments, some questions, some challenge to what I say. Quite frankly, I'm not really interested in your experience right now, or your understanding or knowledge. I'm here in 45 minutes, it's a very short time, to share my knowledge and my experience as simply as I can with you, and to help clarify at least my understanding of the Big Book. Number one, I could not read the Big Book on my own. I'm reasonably intelligent, fairly well educated, and I read English. I could not read the Big Book at age 43 when I first got sober, or at age 48 when I did the steps. I could not read the Big Book on my own. I did not know it at the time. It was only after my sponsor in 1984 helped me go through his version of step 4, which was an autobiography. He didn't use the Big Book. He didn't use the 12 and 12. He used his own experience. And I'm saying it that way because it was good enough. So demystify step 4. If you have any trouble doing it through the Big Book or the 12 and 12, do not hesitate to do an autobiography. Now, not an autobiography of the drama and trauma. No, your autobiography of your relationship to alcohol. Your autobiography of what you drank and when you drank and how you drank and what happened when you drank. And then an autobiography of your behavior and your thoughts, your feelings, your motives, and your emotions. An autobiography, very focused, not for psychology, but for theology. I hope you're hearing that. Of course, it will have a psychological therapeutic impact. Of course, any work that you do in self-reflection will. But that's not the point here. This is not about self-help. You may or may not have had a legitimate, by my standards, a legitimate first step experience where you imploded as the result of your experience, not just understanding, your experience with addiction. Once I start, I cannot stop. Once I stop, I cannot stay stopped. And my life is unmanageable. You may have 1 or more years of abstinence. You may have 1 or 2 more decades of abstinence. Patrick made a very big point in his writing in terms of describing today. He connected it to emotional sobriety. I'm not here to talk about physical sobriety. It's important. It's a sine qua non. I mean, you can't have emotional sobriety without physical sobriety if you're an addict. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about emotional sobriety. Now, the gift of physical sobriety is assumed on page 84 if you do the first 9 steps. Check it out. It says you're placed in a position of neutrality, but only at the end of the 9th step, which includes doing a 4th step. So back to my autobiography. To make it as simple as possible, write your own story and read it to somebody with a focus on everything you're embarrassed on, everything that's a secret, everything that you are uncomfortable thinking about, feeling about, or remembering, and especially talking about. That's not instruction from the big book, but it's instruction from my experience. My very first autobiography within the confines of my addiction was in that hospital program when they asked me to write out my relationship with alcohol. It was an autobiography of my history with alcohol. That was the beginning of my journey. That was the beginning of my awakening, because for the very first time, I began to sense that there was a problem with my drinking. I hadn't seen it beforehand. And when I read it out loud, doing comparable to a 5th step, when I read it out loud, I experienced it for the first time. And I'm going to emphasize that. When you write it, you will know it, maybe for the first time. When you read it out loud, you will experience it, maybe for the very first time. That had to do with addiction. But then at 5 years of sobriety, and again, I'm emphasizing a process here. My step 4 took over 10 years. Not to do one step 4, but to do multiple step 4s from multiple perspectives, from multiple people. I had a sponsor in my first year. I did a step 4 autobiographically. I didn't see much truth and I didn't change, but I did it and I stuck around. Was it good? No, by my standards. Was it good enough? Yes. So here's demystifying it, and it's making it as simple as possible. It doesn't matter what you do. It does matter that you do some form of step 4. Write out your story. That's fine. Not the drama and the trauma, as I mentioned, but your relationship with alcohol, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with other people, especially the areas of dishonesty, discomfort, embarrassment, and secrets. That's as simple as it gets. Then at 5 years of sobriety, this man I met for the very first time, but 5 years, I engaged him as a step guide because I heard that he had a different vocabulary and a different experience. And I asked him to help me do the steps out of the book. We did steps 1, 2, and 3, a story for a different day. He brought me to step 4 in the big book, page 64. And right there it says, we're going to look at the exact nature of our wrongs. We're not looking at our wrongs. We're not looking at our mischief and our misbehavior. We're not looking at jails and blackouts and knockouts and accidents and failures of every sort and color. Nope. Oh, you might, but that's not the point. The point is to look at the exact nature underneath the underneath the underneath. Where does it all come from? You see, in step one, we encounter the darkness. I'm going to use light and darkness as the metaphor for alcohol addiction, for powerless and no choice, for God and choice, for power and choice, for power and decision. All of the first and second and third step vocabulary. We have a shadow in us that blocks us from the sunlight that is in us. And step four is the effort at diminishing and removing the shadow by improving and increasing the light. Identifying what are the shadows. Now, Bill has three that he gives us: resentment and fear and sex. Those are the three categories. It's only in 7 pages, page 64 to 71 in the big book. Very dense material by my understanding, unpacking it over that 10-year period. I'm not going to try to do that right now. My task is to demystify and simplify. I want to do that. Resentment. Number one, resentment. Bill says and he spends the most time on it. He says it's the number one killer. Well, what does resentment mean? Well, most of you know that it's a fancy word for anger. Yeah, it's a fancy word for anger. The emotion of anger. Any good psychologist will tell you that anger is a biological, normal survival reaction. There's nothing wrong with anger. We have survived as a human race as a result of our ability to fight. But when it's held, anger, it's a cancer. And it metastasizes and it chokes out our spiritual life, and it chokes out our soul life, and it chokes out our emotional life. So Bill wants us to take a look at our resentment. Listen to the word, comes from the Latin sentire, to feel. R-E, resentire, resentment, anger. I feel it. My father, I'm 43 years old and I've had lots of therapy, and I'm still having a rage anytime I think or talk about my father. Not just anger, not just resentment, out and out pillow banging rage. Well, obviously I put that on the list. And Bill just says, make a list of the things that make you angry. Resentment. It doesn't matter whether it was yesterday or when you were 4 years old. Perhaps you were abused physically, sexually. Perhaps you were mistreated or abandoned in some ways in your, perhaps you had experienced trauma sometime in your church or in your school or in your family. Not right or wrong. I heard a great word the other day. Not fair or unfair. Get over it. It's history. It did happen. The great word is unfortunate. It's just unfortunate. Take a look at it and hold it. He asks us to make a list of those things that we're angry at and why. I'm angry at my father because he verbally abused me. And then he says, and what did it affect? I can go into a very analytical process with those 7 words on page 65 in the matrix that Bill gives us on the inventory for resentment. But I'm not going to do that today. I want to demystify it. And Alan does that really well in Emotional Sobriety. He talks about shoulds. And Dr. Luskin talks about beliefs. Dr. Luskin is a clinical psychologist that talks about forgiveness, a very big connection to the reversal of the resentments in us. Bill doesn't talk this way. I do because I've incorporated both Dr. Berger and Dr. Luskin and some other people who have helped me really unpack my resentments and get rid of them. Hello? Do you want to be free of your resentments? The book promises it on page 66 and 67. It addresses a page and a half Bill gives us to talk about prayer for the removal of deep resentment, and it's so misinterpreted in the rooms. You hear it in the rooms. It's not a bad thing. It's not unhealthy. It's actually quite a spiritual saying. If you have a resentment, pray for them. It's wonderful. It's just not in the big book. Page 66 and 67 says, if you have a deep resentment, pray for yourself. Pray for spiritual intervention. Invite the spirit of the universe, the divine healer, the divine surgeon, to bring the scalpel and remove the cancer from our soul. I can't do it. I'm powerless over my resentments in the same way I'm powerless over my addiction. I need help. And Bill gives us that in pages 66 and 67. A prayer to remove deep resentment. And this man suggested that I begin the prayer every day. I had 8 deep resentments. I prayed 8 prayers every day, putting specifically the name of the person or the event in the prayer to remove that from my memory, to remove it from my feelings. After about 3 months of daily prayer, I recognized one of them had been removed. And within the next 3 months, all of them had been removed. Please hear me, 1991, I'm 7 years sober. And I get this instruction. And in 6 months, in 1991, I prayed 8 prayers for the removal of 8 deep resentments. And they were all removed. And none of them ever returned. I get emotional. You talk about freedom. All of those deep resentments that resisted spirituality and that resisted church and that resisted therapy, all gone. And have never come back. And then to take a look at the 4th column, where I had my first spiritual experience. Now, there's no 4th column by designation in the big book. It's the final paragraph on page 67 that wraps up Bill's commentary and instruction on column 4, on the resentment inventory. He has 5 questions there. If I get time, I'm going to put the PowerPoints up so that you can see a matrix of it. But I'm kind of in a mode right now of just verbalizing it. I want to stay with that because I want to cover the entire panoramic view of step 4. The key, and you hear it all the time in the rooms, again misquoted, it's not in the big book. What is your part? The big book doesn't say that, doesn't even imply that. It says, what is your role? What is your contribution? What is your responsibility? In so many words. Column 4. What was my thinking, feeling, and action? What was my reaction? You see, life is in session. People's circumstances and events do what people's circumstances and events do. It's not right or wrong, fair or unfair. It just is. That's emotional sobriety. Reality just is what it is. Emotional sobriety is my reaction to it. I don't have a part in my resentment. That was my conclusion. I don't have a part. I have the whole thing. 100%. I must own. I must own my reaction to people, circumstances, and events 100%, because it's mine. Who else's is it? And when I take that stance of full 100% responsibility, I had a spiritual awakening. I am not a victim. I'm the accomplice at the least and the perpetrator at the most. An amazing experience of freedom again, because I can't change people's circumstances and events, anything outside of me or even inside of me. But I can take responsibility for what's inside of me and ask for help at the same time. 6 and 7 were fabulously instrumental in assisting in this change. Maybe a story for a different conversation. Right now, I've got column 1, who did it? Column 2, what am I angry at? Column 3, what's my belief? The should. Number 4, what's my motive? What's my role and responsibility, my reaction? And then to pray for the removal. I'm going to close the door for you just a minute. I have guests here. Thank you. So the next inventory is a fear inventory, much simpler, not as analytical. Bill says, we have fear, make a list. And he says, why do you have it? That's it. I have a fear of, let's assume, I don't, but let's assume, I have a fear of dogs. Why do I have it? Well, again, fictitious. I was attacked by a German Shepherd at age 5, and I had 5 stitches, and it left a trauma. Okay, so now I understand it. And I can deal with it because I've named it. But here's a little more sophisticated. I have a fear of honesty. This is real. This is something that I discovered at 7 years of sobriety. I have a fear of honesty. Well, why do I have it? Because if I tell you what I'm thinking or feeling or doing, I can no longer hide behind the pretense, the facade, the persona, the curtain, the mask that I wear. You will have your own opinion of me regardless of how I sell it. If I tell you the truth, well, why is that important? You see, he kept asking me to ask myself. He never asked me. He asked me to ask myself. Well, then, what was your dishonesty? Well, then, what would have happened, or why did you have that thought, feeling, that reaction? Eventually, I found that I wasn't who I thought I was, and I wanted you to believe what I thought would make me fit in. I didn't fit in. I wanted to fit in, and if I pretended like a chameleon to be green, I would fit in with a green environment unless you wanted a red environment, and then I would be red. That false self that you've heard many people talk about. That personality that we develop that is just fake. It's not really authentic. It's not really us. My sponsor defined rigorous honesty as transparency. And when I asked him what that meant, he said, I want your insides and your outsides to match. I didn't know what he meant until I did this 4th step and this 4th column in the resentment inventory, and then the fear inventory to get underneath the underneath the underneath. I was being dishonest because I had very low self-esteem, and I so much wanted to have high self-esteem that I fantasized about it in a way that even hid it from me. Clueless. Bill suggests in the big book that trust of God is the antidote to fear. Self-reliance is the basis of fear. They coexist. Fear and trust coexist. They're in a reciprocal relationship. The more I trust the universe, myself, and God and others, the less fear I have. The more fear I have, the less I trust God, the universe, life, myself, and others. And it's a balancing act. It's a balancing act. But again, he says at the end of that on page 68, we're as powerless over the removal of our fear as we are over our addiction. Same comment as he made, I'm paraphrasing, as in the resentment inventory. And so we pray. We ask God to remove our fear. Not only ask him so that we can do correctly, but so that we can be healthy. Two different paragraphs, two different verbs. One is so that I can do as good human beings do. The second is that I can actually be a good human being. Pay attention to all of that. But first of all, just name your fears and why you have it. And get underneath it and get underneath it. Well, what would happen if that fear was realized? I would lose my job. I would not pay my rent. I would be on the street. I would be excommunicated from the community. I would be miserable. I would drink again and I would die. Wow. At the end of it all, it was about drinking and dying. When I didn't know that. Or maybe it was even that where there really is no solution, there is no God, there is no power. And I got in touch with my own atheism and agnosticism. Now, one of the most powerful inventories was the sex inventory. After I finished it, I broadened it to a dishonesty inventory because I saw that sex was just a manifestation of dishonesty. Fight, flight, and freeze. Fight my anger, flight my fear, freeze my camouflage. The chameleon I mentioned earlier, to fit in. My dishonesty. But Bill gives us the sex inventory because it's such a powerful ingredient in everyone's life. He acknowledges that there, and he gives us, by my count in the big book on page 69, he gives us 9 questions. And they're all relevant about what did I do and who did it involve and what was I thinking, what was I feeling, what were my motives. But the last question, number 9, was the transforming question for me. Totally transformational. Number 9, what should I have done instead? And when I asked that when I asked that question in prayer, what should I have done instead? Oh, I'm a single man at one point. I was misrepresenting myself, so tell the truth. I was a single man at one point, dating married women. That wasn't my code of morals. It might be yours. It's fine. Bill doesn't have any rules. You know that. He said each one of us has our own principles and values. We just have to identify them. I identified that I had some principles that I didn't know and I didn't use. And I also identified that I didn't have some principles that I would have wanted to have in order to be a decent human being. As a married man, fidelity was my commitment. It wasn't my behavior. 7 years sober. It wasn't my behavior. And I was clueless that there was mischief of, I'll be kind to myself. But I saw that my principle was fidelity, and 6 and 7 resolved that. Again, a story for a different day. But the point of the sex inventory was for me to identify principles of moral behavior for me, principles of decent behavior for me. What should I have done instead? The moment I asked the question, be fair, be honest, have integrity, keep life simple. Or whatever they are. Bill doesn't give us a list of principles, but he hammers us in step 12, practice these principles in all your affairs. Because he knows that we need to stay in alignment with reality. This is my sense of emotional sobriety, the flow of reality and my free will. When I go against the flow of reality, I suffer, and so do other people. When I'm in alignment with reality, my life works and I contribute to the humanity around me. The total turning in step 3 that we commit to in step 3 is the turning from our self-centeredness, as he says on page 62, to being other-centered, meaning a relationship with God as I don't understand it, and a relationship with life as I'm attempting to understand it. A relationship of alignment, of the flow of reality. And the major thing, and I'm going to stop here, and you're welcome to ask questions more specifically than I've been about any aspect of the 4th step. It's important to do a 4th step with somebody who has in fact done a 4th step. It's actually even more important if that person has done it out of the big book and had an experience with it. This man who had the experience, his major point to me was no secrets. This was his starting admonition and his concluding question. No secrets, nothing hidden. If you have a thought or a feeling or a doubt or a guilt or a shame or an embarrassment, anything, even though you might have told your therapist or your attorney and or prior sponsors, and you still feel uncomfortable, it needs to be on the list as a disclosed item talked about. Amazing. And after that first 5th step at 5 years of sobriety, I began to wake up and have freedom. After the second 4th step at 7 years of sobriety, I had a broader and deeper expansion of my awareness and my truth. And after my 3rd journey through the steps at 10 years of sobriety with a 3rd step guide. I'm saying it this way, not to impress you. That is not my point. But to open your heart up that this is a process, not one and done. Now, I haven't done a 4th step since 1996 because that was a thorough spiritual awakening by my standards today, and I live consistently in 10, 11, and 12, taking care of things as they emerge on a daily basis. I have a sponsor. I have had only 2 sponsors. I have a regular relationship of honesty and transparency with those men and with other people that I choose on a select basis, sometimes professionals and sometimes just friends or companions. I'm going to end right now with the same way I opened up. The 4th step is critical, not that you do it right, that you do it. And it doesn't matter how you do it. Whatever you do will be good enough. Whatever you do will be good enough. You heard me. 4 different journeys, 4 different people, beginning with my 1st year, over a 10-year period. And the shadows have been dissipated by the light. And I have now a very vibrant relationship with God of my not understanding. I use light and mystery as my words today, and I'm in the flow, and my life flourishes. All right, so if you have questions, concerns, the 12 and 12 has a different approach. It uses the 7 capital sins. I do not use that model, but some people do, and it's very productive. But the big book is my textbook for doing step 4. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Patrick.